Lisa Morgan stared out the window of the transport ship as Nexus Prime came into view. The massive space station looked like a steel fortress floating among the stars. She felt her stomach tighten with nervousness. In all her 28 years, she had never been this far from Earth, and she had certainly never been invited to visit the Vrexians before. The Vrexians were one of the most powerful warrior races in the galaxy. They stood over 7 feet tall with scaled skin that ranged from deep green to dark gray. Their eyes were sharp and predatory, and their society valued strength above all else. They had little respect for humanity, viewing humans as weak and overly emotional. Yet somehow, Lisa had received an invitation to observe their elite cub training program. Her superior officer had warned her before she left. "They're testing you," he had said. "Testing all of humanity. Don't give them a reason to look down on us even more." The transport ship docked with a metallic clang. Lisa gathered her small bag and stepped into the station's corridor. The temperature immediately struck her as uncomfortably warm. Perfect for reptilian species, but making her human skin prickle with sweat. She walked through the hallway, following the signs written in 3 different alien languages. At least they had included English translations. A tall Vrexian female waited for her at the observation deck entrance. Her scales were a beautiful dark emerald color, and she wore military insignia that marked her as someone important. "I am Commander Velnara," she said, her voice deep and slightly hissing. "You are the human observer." "Yes, ma'am." "Lisa Morgan." Lisa extended her hand for a handshake, then remembered that Vrexians found physical contact with strangers offensive. She quickly pulled her hand back. "Thank you for inviting me." Velnara's eyes studied her with an expression Lisa couldn't read. "I approved your visit despite much opposition. Do not make me regret this decision. You will observe only. You will not speak to the cubs. You will not interfere with their training. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good. Instructor Zrakoth is waiting." Velnara turned and walked away, her tail swishing behind her. Lisa followed a guide through several more corridors until they reached a large training room. The space was enormous, with high ceilings and equipment that looked designed for combat practice. In the center of the room stood 12 young Vrexians, all standing at attention. They were smaller than adults, maybe 5 feet tall, but their scales already showed the patterns they would carry for life. At the front of the group stood the largest Vrexian Lisa had seen yet. His scales were dark gray, almost black, and covered with pale scars. One of his eyes had a long scar running through it. This had to be Instructor Zrakoth. He turned to look at Lisa, and his expression showed pure contempt. "So," he said loudly, his voice echoing through the room, "the council sends me a human observer, a representative of the soft species. Cubs, look at this creature. This is what weakness looks like when it walks on 2 legs." The cubs turned to stare at Lisa. She felt her face grow hot with embarrassment and anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her upset. "This human will watch your training," Zrakoth continued. "Let her see what true strength looks like. Perhaps she will report back to her kind that they will never match Vrexian power." He gestured dismissively at Lisa. "Sit in the corner. Do not speak. Do not move." Lisa walked to the observation area and sat on a bench clearly designed for beings much larger than herself. From this spot, she had a clear view of the entire training floor. Zrakoth turned back to his cubs. "Today you will practice zero-gravity combat. This exercise separates the strong from the weak. 4 of you will fail. 4 of you always fail." He pressed a button on his wrist device, and suddenly the gravity in the room shut off. Lisa felt her body lift from the bench. She grabbed the edge to keep herself from floating away. The cubs, however, moved with practiced ease. They had done this before. Zrakoth activated another control, and suddenly spheres began shooting out from the walls, moving fast and targeting the cubs. The young Vrexians had to dodge the spheres while fighting against each other in zero gravity. It looked incredibly dangerous. If a sphere hit one of the cubs at that speed, it could break bones or worse. Lisa watched with growing concern as the cubs struggled through the exercise. One small cub, clearly the youngest of the group, kept getting hit by the spheres. Each impact made him spin wildly through the air. The other cubs ignored him, focused on their own survival. After 20 brutal minutes, Zrakoth ended the exercise. Gravity returned, and several cubs fell hard to the floor. The small cub who had struggled lay on the ground, breathing heavily. Dark bruises were already forming on his scales. Pathetic, Kex, Zrakoth said, walking over to the small cub. You dishonor your clutch with this weakness. Kex struggled to his feet, trying to hide his pain. Yes, Instructor. Zrakoth turned to address all the cubs. Remember, only the strong survive. Your fellow cubs are not your friends. They are your competition. In 3 months, you will face the final trial. Only 8 of you will pass. The other 4 will be sent to the labor colonies where weak cubs are useful for mining and dangerous work. Lisa felt shock run through her. They were children. How could they send children to labor colonies? She noticed that Kex kept glancing at her when Zrakoth wasn't looking. His eyes showed curiosity rather than hostility. A few other cubs also stole quick looks at her. The training continued for another 3 hours. Lisa watched exercises that would kill an untrained human within minutes. The cubs practiced with weapons that could cut through metal. They ran obstacle courses with no safety equipment. When one cub fell and injured her arm, Zrakoth showed no concern. He simply ordered her to continue or fail. Finally, the session ended. The cubs filed out of the room exhausted and bruised. As Kex walked past Lisa's observation area, he did something surprising. He made brief eye contact with her and tilted his head slightly, a gesture that seemed like a question. Then he was gone, following the other cubs out of the room. Zrakoth approached Lisa, his scarred face twisted in a sneer. Well, human? Are you horrified? Do you think us cruel? Lisa stood up carefully, meeting his eyes. I think your cubs are very brave and strong. This answer seemed to surprise him. He studied her for a long moment. Brave, strong, yes, they must be, because the galaxy is not kind to the weak, and I will not send weak cubs into a universe that will destroy them. He stepped closer, towering over her. Your kind do not understand this. You coddle your young. You teach them that feelings matter more than survival. That is why humanity will never be respected among the true warrior races. Lisa wanted to argue, but she remembered Commander Velnara's warning. She simply nodded and said nothing. Zrakoth made a dismissive sound and walked away. Alone in the training room, Lisa sat back down on the bench. Her hands were shaking. What had she gotten herself into? These cubs were being pushed beyond any reasonable limit, even for their species, and Kex, the small one, seemed especially at risk. She thought about the way he had looked at her. There had been intelligence in those eyes, curiosity, maybe even hope. Lisa made a decision then. She would follow the rules. She would observe and not interfere, but she would watch carefully. Something about this situation felt very wrong, and she suspected that before her visit was over, she would have to make some difficult choices. The question was whether she would have the courage to make them when the time came. Lisa's 3rd day on Nexus Prime began like the previous 2. She woke in her small quarters, ate a breakfast of food synthesized to human nutritional needs, and made her way to the training room. The routine was becoming familiar, but the training sessions never became easier to watch. Today, Instructor Zrakoth had the cubs practicing blade combat. Real blades, sharp enough to cut through armor. Lisa sat in her observation corner, trying not to show her concern as the young Vrexians slashed and parried with weapons that could easily kill them. She had learned the cubs' names by now, though speaking to them was still forbidden. Zira was the cohort leader, a fierce female with bright green scales who never seemed to tire. Tak and Ren were twins, always fighting side by side. And then there was Kex, the smallest, who continued to struggle but never gave up. During a water break, Lisa noticed something that made her heart sink. Kex was limping badly, favoring his left leg. He tried to hide it, but Lisa could see the pain in the way he moved. When training resumed, he could barely keep up with the others. Zrakoth noticed too. Kex, are you injured? No, Instructor, Kex lied, standing as straight as he could. Then move faster. Stop dragging behind like a dying prey animal. Kex tried. Lisa could see him pushing himself beyond what his body could handle. Then, during a particularly aggressive attack sequence, his injured leg gave out. He fell hard and his opponent's blade came down toward his chest. The blade stopped inches from Kex's scales. His opponent, a cub named Pix, had pulled the strike at the last second. Weakness, Zrakoth roared. Pix, why did you stop your blade? In real combat, the enemy shows no mercy. Pix looked confused. But Kex is down. The fight is over. The fight is over when your opponent is dead. Again, Lisa couldn't stay quiet anymore. He's hurt, she said, her voice carrying across the training room. Every head turned to look at her. The room fell completely silent. Zrakoth walked slowly toward her, his expression dangerous. The human speaks. I do not recall giving you permission to speak. Lisa stood up, her legs shaking but her voice steady. That cub is injured. He needs medical attention. That cub is learning. Pain teaches better than any instructor. Pain and injury are different things. If his leg is damaged and he keeps training on it, he could cause permanent harm. Zrakoth's eyes narrowed. You dare tell me how to train Vrexian cubs? You who come from a species so soft you need doctors for every small hurt? I'm not telling you how to train. I'm asking you to let a medic look at his leg. For a long moment, Zrakoth just stared at her. Lisa thought he might throw her out of the station entirely. Then he laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. Very well. Let the medic come. Let the cub see how the human cares about weakness. He turned to Kex. You should thank the soft human for showing everyone your failure. Kex looked at Lisa with an expression she couldn't read. Was it gratitude? Shame? Confusion? The medic arrived and examined Kex's leg. The diagnosis was a partially torn ligament. The medic gave Kex an injection and ordered him to rest for 3 days. Zrakoth dismissed the cub from training with obvious disgust. As Kex limped out of the room, he passed close to Lisa. Thank you, he whispered, so quietly that only she could hear. After that day, everything changed. Zrakoth watched Lisa with increased hostility, but the cubs watched her with curiosity. During breaks, when the instructor wasn't looking, they would steal glances at her. Zira especially seemed to be studying her. On the 5th day, Lisa was walking back to her quarters when she heard a voice from a side corridor. Human? She turned to find 3 cubs standing in the shadows, Tak, Ren, and another cub named Sira. They looked nervous, constantly checking to make sure no adults were around. You're not supposed to talk to me, Lisa said softly. We know, Tak said, but we have questions about humans. Lisa knew she should walk away. Commander Velnara's rules had been clear, but the cubs looked so curious, so eager to learn. What do you want to know? The questions came quickly then. Why had she helped Kex? Did humans really feel pain the way Vrexians did? Was it true that human parents stayed with their children instead of sending them to training centers? Did humans really cry when they were sad? Lisa answered honestly, keeping her voice low. She told them about human families, about how parents raised their children with love and care. She told them about friendship, about helping others not because you had to, but because you wanted to. But doesn't that make you weak? Sira asked. If you care about others, they can be used against you. Maybe, Lisa said. Or maybe caring about others makes you fight harder to protect them. Maybe it gives you a different kind of strength. The cubs looked at each other, clearly thinking about this new idea. Then footsteps echoed down the corridor and they scattered quickly, disappearing before anyone could see them. After that night, more cubs began seeking her out. They would find her during their free time in empty corridors or storage rooms, asking questions about Earth and humanity. Lisa knew she was breaking the rules, but she couldn't turn them away. Kex became her most frequent visitor. His leg was healing, but he continued to come to her quarters during rest periods. He would sit on the floor and ask endless questions. One day he asked something that chilled Lisa's blood. What happens to human children who fail? Fail what? Lisa asked. Training, tests. When they're not good enough. Where do they go? They don't go anywhere. We help them learn in different ways. We find what they're good at. Kex's eyes widened. You don't send them away? To the labor colonies? No, never. Children are precious to us. We protect them no matter what. Kex was quiet for a long moment. The final trial is in 2 months, he finally said. 4 of us will fail. 4 of us will be sent to the mining colonies. The work there kills most cubs within 2 years. Lisa felt sick. That's wrong. Your children. All of you should be protected and taught. Not thrown away if you're not perfect. That's not the Vrexian way. Maybe the Vrexian way is wrong about this. Kex looked shocked that she would say such a thing, but he didn't argue. Instead, he asked, what is a hug? The question surprised Lisa. A hug? It's when you put your arms around someone to show you care about them. Why? I heard older cubs talking. They said humans hug their parents. Even when they're grown. I don't understand why. Lisa smiled sadly. Because sometimes everyone needs to know they're not alone. That someone cares about them. Kex thought about this. Then hesitantly he said, Vrexians don't do that. Physical affection is considered weak. That sounds lonely. Yes, Keck said quietly. It is very lonely. Over the following weeks, Lisa watched the cubs' training grow more intense. Zrakoth seemed determined to push them harder than ever. He made comments about human weakness, about how soft thinking was poisoning the cubs' minds. He clearly suspected that Lisa was having conversations with them, though he had no proof. Then, on the 20th day of Lisa's visit, Zrakoth made an announcement that filled the room with tension. Cubs, your final trial has been moved forward. In 5 days, you will enter the survival simulation. The trial will last 3 days. 4 of you will fail. Choose now whether you will be among the strong or the weak. Lisa saw fear flash across several cubs' faces, though they tried to hide it. Even Zira, the strong cohort leader, looked worried. But it was Kex's expression that troubled Lisa most. He looked terrified, and when his eyes met hers across the training room, she saw something else there too. He was asking for help, and Lisa had no idea how she could possibly give it to him. The night before the trial, Lisa couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling of her quarters, thinking about the 12 cubs who would enter the simulation tomorrow. 4 of them would fail. 4 children would be sent to die slowly in mining colonies, and everyone seemed to think this was acceptable. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. She opened it to find all 12 cubs standing in the corridor, looking nervous and determined. "We shouldn't be here," Zira said, her voice low. "But we wanted to see you before the trial." Lisa quickly pulled them inside her quarters. "If Zrakoth finds out, we don't care," Talk said. Several other cubs nodded in agreement. They crowded into her small room, some sitting on the floor, others standing. Keck sat closest to Lisa, his tail wrapped nervously around his legs. "Tell us again about the human idea," Zira said. "The one you told Kex about." "No one left behind." Lisa looked at their faces. They were so young, too young for what they were about to face. In human military training, there's a principle. You never leave a teammate behind. If someone falls, you help them up. If someone is injured, you carry them. The mission isn't complete until everyone who can be saved is saved. But that's not efficient, Pick said, though he sounded uncertain. If someone is weak, they slow down the strong. Maybe, Lisa said. But humans learned something important. When people know their team will never abandon them, they fight harder. They push themselves more. They're willing to take risks because they trust others to catch them if they fall. Working together makes everyone stronger. Instructor Zrakoth says trust is weakness, another cub said. Your instructor is wrong about many things. The words were out before Lisa could stop them. The cub's eyes widened. No one spoke badly about instructors, ever. But Zira surprised her by saying, "We think so too. We've been talking. The things you've told us about humans, about caring for each other, about protecting the young, it makes sense. More sense than what we've been taught." Zira leaned forward. "Tomorrow, when the trial begins, they'll scatter us across different zones in the simulation. We're supposed to compete against each other, but what if we didn't? What if we used your human idea? What if we helped each other?" "You could all pass," Lisa said, feeling hope rise in her chest. "If you work together, share resources, watch each other's backs. You're smart and strong. Together you could all make it to the extraction point." The cubs looked at each other, and Lisa could see an understanding passing between them. They were making a decision that went against everything they'd been taught. "We'll do it," Zira said. "All 12 of us will finish together, or we all fail together." Kex reached out and touched Lisa's hand, a gesture that would scandalize any adult Vrexian. "Thank you for showing us a different way." The cubs left quickly, disappearing back to their dormitory before anyone could find them. Lisa sat alone in her quarters, her heart pounding. What had she done? If the cubs failed because of her teaching, would Zrakoth blame her? Would it make human-Vrexian relations even worse? But more importantly, what if the cubs succeeded? What if they proved that cooperation was stronger than competition? The next morning came too quickly. Lisa made her way to the observation deck where she would watch the trial. Commander Velnara was already there, along with several other Vrexian officials. And Instructor Zrakoth stood at the control panel. His scarred face twisted in a smile that made Lisa's blood run cold. The cubs were led into the staging area. They wore minimal gear and carried basic survival packs. Lisa could see them glancing at each other, silent communication passing between them. Zrakoth addressed them one final time. "You know the rules. Reach the extraction point within 72 hours. The first 8 to arrive pass. The last 4 fail. The simulation is set to harsh ice planet conditions. There are predators, environmental hazards, and limited resources. This is your final test. Prove you are worthy to be called Vrexian warriors. He pressed a button and the cubs were transported into the simulation. The observation screens lit up, showing 12 different views as the cubs materialized in separate locations across the frozen wasteland. But then Zrakoth did something that made Lisa's stomach drop. He pulled up a separate control screen, one the other observers couldn't see from their angle, and began entering new commands. "What are you doing?" Lisa asked. He glanced at her with that cold smile. "Making adjustments. I suspect the cubs have been contaminated by soft human thinking. This trial will burn that weakness out of them." His fingers moved across the controls. "I'm increasing the difficulty. More predators, colder temperatures, fewer resources, and I'm adding something special for you, human observer." On one of the screens, Lisa saw herself materialize inside the simulation. She wasn't in her quarters anymore. She was standing in the frozen wasteland wearing only the light clothes she'd had on moments before. "What have you done?" Commander Velnara demanded, turning from her viewing station. "The human has been poisoning my cubs with her weak philosophy," Zrakoth said calmly. "She claims humans are not weak. Let her prove it. Let her survive the trial designed to break Vrexian warriors. We'll see how strong humanity really is." This was not authorized. Velnara moved toward the control panel, but Zrakoth blocked her path. "I have authority over this trial. The human wanted to be involved with the cubs. Now she is. Very involved." Lisa felt panic rising. She wasn't prepared for this. She had no survival gear, no training for Arctic conditions. The simulation might not be real, but the danger was. The safety protocols would prevent death, but injury and suffering were very much possible. On the screens, she watched her simulated self start to shiver. The temperature was well below freezing. She had minutes, maybe an hour at most, before hypothermia set in, and according to the map, she was in the most dangerous zone, far from any shelter or resources. The cubs appeared on their individual screens, each one assessing their situation. Then one by one, Lisa saw them check their tracking devices. In the simulation, each cub had a scanner that could locate the others. She watched as Kex looked at his scanner, saw Lisa's signal in the danger zone, and his eyes widened. He immediately changed direction, heading away from the extraction point and toward Lisa's location. On another screen, Zira did the same thing, then Tok and Ren. One by one, all 12 cubs abandoned their direct routes to safety and began moving toward Lisa instead. "No," Lisa whispered. "No, don't, save yourselves," but they couldn't hear her. They were in the simulation, and she was stuck in the observation deck watching herself freeze to death while the cubs threw away their futures to save her. Zrakoth laughed. "Look at this. The cubs abandoned their mission for the weak human. This is what your soft thinking has created. They will all fail now, and it will be your fault." Commander Velnara was arguing with the other officials, demanding they override the trial. But the protocols were clear. Once a trial began, only the instructor could stop it. And Zrakoth had no intention of stopping anything. On the screen showing Lisa's viewpoint, a predator appeared. Something large and white, perfectly camouflaged against the snow. It moved toward her simulated self with deadly intent. Lisa watched in horror as her other self tried to run, but the cold had already made her sluggish. The creature was faster. It pounced, and Lisa heard her own scream echo through the observation deck speakers. Then the screen went dark. Either she had lost consciousness or the simulation had temporarily blacked out. When the image returned, Lisa saw something that made her heart ache. Kex had reached her. The small cub who could barely keep up with his cohort had somehow made it through the frozen wasteland faster than anyone. He stood between Lisa's injured body and the predator, holding a blade he must have scavenged along the way. The predator was 3 times his size. Kex was shaking, whether from cold or fear Lisa couldn't tell. But he didn't run. He stood his ground, protecting her. And on the other screens, 11 more cubs were racing through the snow, all heading toward the same location. None of them were going to the extraction point. They were all coming to save her. Zrakoth's smile had faded. He stared at the screens with something like disbelief. "They're not supposed to do this," he muttered. "Warriors don't sacrifice themselves for the weak." But Lisa understood what he didn't. The cubs weren't being weak. They were being strong in a way Zrakoth had never taught them. They were being strong enough to care, brave enough to help, and loyal enough to risk everything for someone who had shown them kindness. The question now was whether their new strength would be enough to survive what Zrakoth had created. Because as Lisa watched the simulation screens, she saw him entering more commands, making the trial even deadlier. He wasn't going to let the Cubs win. He was going to make sure they all failed, even if it killed them. Inside the simulation, Lisa's body felt like it was made of ice. Every breath hurt her lungs. Her hands and feet had gone numb. She knew these were signs of severe hypothermia, but her mind was too foggy to remember what to do about it. Through blurred vision, she saw Kex fighting the predator. The creature was huge with white fur and teeth like knives. Kex was so small compared to it. He slashed with his blade, trying to keep the beast away from Lisa's body. The cub was making sounds Lisa had never heard before, desperate warning cries that echoed across the frozen landscape. Then Zira appeared, running through the snow at full speed. She crashed into the predator's side, knocking it away from Kex. The creature roared and turned its attention to this new threat. Zira and Kex fought side by side, their movements matching in a way that showed real teamwork. More cubs arrived. Tok and Ren came from the east, while Pix and Zira approached from the west. They formed a circle around Lisa's body, facing outward against the predator and the harsh environment. The creature, seeing it was now outnumbered, backed away and disappeared into the snow. "The human is freezing," Zira said, dropping to her knees beside Lisa. "We need to warm her up." Kex was already removing his thermal pack. The insulated blanket all cubs had been given. It was designed for Vrexian body temperature, but it was better than nothing. They wrapped it around Lisa, and several cubs pressed close to her, sharing their body heat. In the observation deck, Commander Velnara was shouting at Zrakoth. "End the simulation now. The human is in real danger. The safety protocols will activate if she's truly dying," Zrakoth said coldly. "Until then, the trial continues. Let's see if the Cubs' new cooperation can actually save her." Lisa watched the screens with her hands pressed against the glass. She wanted to scream at the Cubs to leave her to save themselves, but she could only watch as they struggled to keep her alive. Inside the simulation, Pix was checking Lisa's vital signs with his scanner. "Her temperature is too low. The blanket isn't enough. We need shelter and heat." "The extraction point has shelter," Zira said, "but it's 2 days away at normal speed. She won't survive that long." Zira looked around at the frozen wasteland. "Then we build shelter here. Tok, Ren, find ice blocks. We'll make a snow cave. Kex, you're the smallest and fastest. Search for any fuel sources or heat packs. The rest of us will defend this position and care for the human." The cubs moved with purpose, and Lisa felt tears forming as she watched them. They were children. They shouldn't have to do this. But they worked together with impressive efficiency, each one contributing their strengths to the group. Within an hour, they had constructed a crude but effective shelter from packed snow and ice. They moved Lisa inside, and Kex returned with 3 emergency heat packs he'd salvaged from other zones. The packs were designed for Vrexian use, but they generated warmth, and that was what mattered. Lisa's simulated self slowly began to warm up. Her shivering became less violent. Her eyes opened, focusing on the cubs around her. "You came," she whispered. "All of you came." "Of course we came," Kex said, sitting beside her. "You taught us that we don't leave people behind. Did you think we wouldn't use that teaching? But you'll fail the trial. All of you." Zira shook her head. "We're not failing. We're just changing what success means. We all reach the extraction point together, or we don't go at all." "That's not possible. I'm too slow. I'm injured. The extraction point is 2 days away." "Then we carry you," Pix said simply. "We'll take turns. We're stronger when we work together. You taught us that too." In the observation deck, Zrakoth's expression had shifted from contempt to anger. "This is not how warriors behave. This is corruption. This is weakness pretending to be strength." Commander Velnara stared at the screens. "Is it? Look at what they've accomplished. They've survived conditions that have broken many adult trainees. They've defended against predators, built shelter, and managed their resources, all while protecting an injured teammate. That seems like strength to me. They've abandoned the mission." "No," Velnara said quietly. "They've redefined it. And perhaps we should have done that long ago." The trial continued. The cubs took turns carrying Lisa. who was still too weak from hypothermia to walk properly. They moved slowly but steadily toward the extraction point. When predators attacked, they fought as a unit. When resources were scarce, they shared equally. When one cub grew tired, others supported them. But Zrakoth wasn't finished. Through the control panel, Lisa watched him activate more hazards. Ice storms, ground that broke apart unexpectedly, predator packs instead of single hunters. He was determined to break them. On the second night of the trial, the cubs huddled in another makeshift shelter. They were exhausted, their supplies nearly gone. Lisa's simulated self was stable but weak. The extraction point was still half a day away, and dawn would bring new challenges. Keck sat next to Lisa, his eyes half closed with exhaustion. "Tell me about Earth," he said softly. "Tell me about human families." Lisa's voice was quiet, and the cubs leaned in to hear. She told them about homes where children were safe, about parents who tucked their kids into bed and told them stories, about schools where learning was encouraged, not punished, about friends who chose to be together because they cared about each other, not because they were forced to compete. "It sounds peaceful," Zira said. "Is it real? Or are you making it sound better than it is?" "It's real," Lisa said. "Not perfect. Humans have problems too. But we try to take care of each other. We try to make sure children grow up safe and loved." "I wish I had grown up like that," Zira whispered. Several other cubs made soft sounds of agreement. "Maybe your cubs will," Lisa said. "Maybe you'll be the ones to change things. You're already proving that cooperation works better than competition." On the third morning, the final day of the trial, the cubs began their last push toward the extraction point. Lisa could walk again, though slowly. The cubs surrounded her, keeping her in the center of their group where she was most protected. They were close, so close to success when Zrakoth activated his final trap. The ground beneath them suddenly gave way. It wasn't supposed to do that. The simulation protocols had rules about safe limits, but Zrakoth had overridden those protocols. The cubs and Lisa fell through collapsing ice into a cavern below. It was dark and cold, and from deeper in the darkness came sounds of movement. Something big, something hungry. And above them, the hole they'd fallen through began to freeze over, trapping them inside. Lisa heard the cubs calling to each other in the darkness, making sure everyone had survived the fall. Incredibly, they all had, bruised and scared but alive. "The extraction point is right above us," Zira said, her voice tight with frustration. "We were almost there. Then we climb," Keck said. "Or we find another way out. We've come this far together. We finish together." The sounds from deeper in the cavern grew louder. Multiple predators attracted by the noise of their fall. The cubs formed their defensive circle again, protecting Lisa in the center. In the observation deck, Commander Velnara was screaming at Zrakoth, demanding he end the simulation. Other officials were trying to access the override controls, but Zrakoth had locked them out. Only he could stop this now, and he was smiling. "Let's see if their cooperation saves them from this," he said. Lisa watched the screens, her heart breaking. The cubs had done everything right. They'd been brave, smart, and loyal. They deserved to succeed, but Zrakoth had made sure they couldn't. He'd rather see them die than admit his teaching methods were wrong. The predators emerged from the shadows. 6 of them, all massive. The cubs raised their weapons, standing firm despite their exhaustion and fear, and Lisa realized something. Even if they didn't survive this, even if Zrakoth succeeded in destroying them, the cubs had already won. They'd proven that caring for each other didn't make them weak. They'd shown that loyalty and teamwork were forms of strength their instructor couldn't understand. They'd changed everything. The question now was whether anyone would survive to tell others about it. The 6 predators circled closer. The cubs stood in their defensive formation, weapons ready, but Lisa could see their exhaustion. They'd been in the simulation for almost 3 days with little food and no real rest. They were running on determination alone. In the observation deck, Lisa watched helplessly as the situation spiraled out of control. Commander Velnara was no longer arguing with Zrakoth. She'd called security. Armed Vrexian guards were on their way to remove the instructor from the control panel by force if necessary. But would they arrive in time? Inside the cavern, the first predator attacked. Zira met it head-on, her blade flashing in the dim light. 2 more cubs joined her, and together they drove the creature back. But that left the other side of their circle vulnerable. Another predator lunged at Kex and Pix. Kex was still weak from his earlier injuries, but he fought anyway. Pick stood beside him and their coordination was perfect. They moved like they'd been fighting together their whole lives, not just 3 days. Lisa's simulated self grabbed a sharp rock from the cavern floor. She wasn't a fighter, but she wouldn't just stand there while the cubs died protecting her. When a predator got too close, she struck at its eyes. The creature roared and backed away. The human fights. Talk called out, and Lisa heard something like pride in his voice. But they were being overwhelmed. More predators were emerging from the deeper darkness. The cubs couldn't hold them all off. One broke through their line and went straight for Lisa. Sierra threw herself in front of the attack, taking a slash across her shoulder that would have killed Lisa. No! Lisa screamed, catching Sierra as she fell. In the observation deck, alarms began blaring. Sierra's vital signs had crossed into the danger zone. The safety protocols should have activated, pulling her from the simulation. But nothing happened. Zrakoth had disabled even that failsafe. The security guards burst into the observation deck. Commander Velnara pointed at Zrakoth. Remove him from the controls now. But Zrakoth moved faster than Lisa expected. He activated a manual lock on the control panel and stepped away, his hands raised. The system is locked. Only I know the code. If you want to save them, you'll have to ask nicely. This is attempted murder, Velnara said, her voice deadly calm. This is training, Zrakoth replied. If they're strong enough, they'll survive. If not, they don't deserve to pass. Inside the simulation, the cubs were losing ground. Sierra's injury had weakened their formation. The predators sensed it and pressed harder. Lisa held pressure on Sierra's wound, trying to stop the bleeding while the other cubs fought desperately around them. Then Kex did something unexpected. He pulled a small device from his belt. It was a recording unit, the kind cubs used to document their training progress. He'd been carrying it the whole time. Instructor Zrakoth, Kex called out, his voice echoing in the cavern. He was speaking to the recording unit, but somehow Lisa knew his words were reaching the observation deck too. You taught us that honor and strength define a Vrexian warrior. But you have no honor. You disabled safety protocols. You're trying to kill cubs because you can't accept that your teaching methods are wrong. You're afraid that we might prove cooperation is stronger than your cruelty. In the observation deck, every screen suddenly shifted. Instead of showing different views of the simulation, they all showed Kex's recording. A recording that had been uploading to the station's main network the entire trial. The screens played back moments from training sessions. Zrakoth's abuse, cubs injured and denied medical care, his comments about sending failures to labor colonies, the threats, the modifications he'd made to the trial, everything. The recording had been broadcasting to the entire station. Every official, every instructor, every parent of the cubs, everyone could see what Zrakoth had been doing. Commander Velnara's expression shifted from anger to something fiercer. Guards, I want that code. Use whatever force is necessary. But before they could move, another Vrexian entered the observation deck. She was older, with scales that showed her age and rank. Lisa recognized her from briefings as High Commander Cal Ress, the head of all Vrexian training programs. I have seen the recording, Cal Ress said, her voice cold enough to freeze fire. Instructor Zrakoth, you are removed from duty permanently. You will face trial for abuse of authority and attempted murder. Now give us the code. Zrakoth's confident expression finally cracked. He looked at the screens showing the cubs fighting for their lives, at the recording of his own crimes, at the assembled officials who now looked at him with disgust. His entire world was collapsing. The code, Cal Ress repeated, or I will ensure you spend the rest of your life in the same labor colonies you threatened to send children to. Zrakoth gave them the code. Velnara was at the control panel instantly. Her fingers flew across the buttons, shutting down the predators, stabilizing the temperature, activating the medical protocols. Extraction team to the cavern. Emergency medical support, move. In the simulation, the predators suddenly stopped attacking. They simply froze in place, then faded away like ghosts. The cubs stood in confusion, weapons still raised, not understanding what had happened. Bright light flooded the cavern as the extraction team materialized around them. Medical personnel rushed to Sierra first, then began checking the other cubs. A human medic appeared beside Lisa. You're safe now, the medic said gently. It's over. Lisa felt the simulation dissolve around her. One moment she was in the frozen cavern. The next she was back in the observation deck, her real body shaking with reaction. Commander Velnara caught her before she could fall. "I'm sorry," Velnara said quietly. "This should never have happened." Lisa barely heard her. She was watching the screens as the cubs were brought out of the simulation one by one. They looked exhausted, injured, traumatized, but alive. All 12 of them were alive. The next few hours passed in a blur. Lisa was taken to the medical bay, treated for shock and minor injuries from the simulation feedback. The cubs were in nearby rooms receiving treatment and being evaluated. Parents were being contacted. Officials were interviewing everyone involved. It was late in the station's night cycle when Lisa was finally allowed to leave medical. She walked slowly through the quiet corridors, heading back to her quarters. She was exhausted, but she needed to check on the cubs before she could rest. She found them in their common room, all 12 of them. Someone had decided they should stay together tonight instead of being separated into individual rooms. They sat in a group, some bandaged, all looking worn out. But when they saw Lisa in the doorway, their faces lit up. "Lisa," Kex was the first to reach her. He stopped just short of touching her, remembering Vrexian customs. But then, hesitantly, he opened his arms in the gesture she'd taught him. A hug. Lisa knelt down and wrapped her arms around the small cub. He held on tight and she felt him shaking. One by one, the other cubs came over. Soon Lisa was surrounded by 12 young Vrexians, all pressing close in a group embrace that would have been unthinkable a month ago. "You saved us," Zira said softly. "Not with strength or weapons. You saved us by teaching us that caring for each other isn't weakness. You saved yourselves," Lisa corrected gently. "I just showed you a different way. You were brave enough to take it." Commander Velnara appeared in the doorway. She watched the scene with an expression of wonder. "This will change everything," she said. "The recording Kex made has spread throughout the Vrexian networks. Everyone is seeing it. Parents are demanding changes. The Council is already calling for reform. High Commander Calres has appointed me to develop new training protocols." She looked at Lisa. "We would like your help, to show us how to train warriors who are strong enough to fight and strong enough to care, if you're willing." Lisa looked at the cubs around her, at Kex, who had been so small and scared but had become so brave, at Zira, who had learned that true leadership meant protecting everyone, not just the strong, at all 12 cubs who had risked everything to save her. "I'm willing," Lisa said, "but only if we do it right. Only if we protect all the cubs, not just the ones who fit traditional ideals of strength." "Agreed," Velnara said. "The Vrexian Empire has much to learn from humanity. I suspect this is only the beginning." Over the following months, Lisa stayed on Nexus Prime. She worked with Velnara and other officials to redesign the training programs. The labor colony punishment was abolished. New instructors were trained in methods that balanced strength with compassion. Cubs were taught teamwork alongside individual combat skills. The 12 cubs of Kex's cohort became symbols of the new way. They all passed their final evaluations together, the first group in Vrexian history where no one was left behind. They went on to become instructors themselves, spreading the lessons they'd learned throughout their society. 3 years later, Lisa stood in a ceremony hall on the Vrexian homeworld. She was there to see Kex, Zira, and the others receive their warrior marks, the highest honor in their culture. But the ceremony was different now. Instead of individual achievements, they were being honored as a cohort, recognized for their strength as a team. After the ceremony, Kex approached her. He was taller now, his scales darker, but his eyes still held that same curiosity and kindness that had first made Lisa believe in him. "Thank you," he said, "for teaching me that strength comes in many,